What's going on, you guys? It's your Huggable Hipster here, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to be going over the top 5 most psychologically disturbing characters in Elden Ring, including the DLC and base game. I didn't even know where to start off with this list because any way you slice it, there's going to be a character that has some sort of disturbing nature to it within this game. Any NPC you pick, any character, any boss, there's going to be something disturbing about it. Coming in at number 5, Mohg. This character I actually just feel bad for, to be quite honest. The trauma, the abuse that Miquella put Mohg through is disgusting, quite frankly. At first, we thought Mohg was kind of, just a creeper. Like, we didn't think that highly of Mohg after finding out everything that happened, between Mohg and Miquella. But then we find out during the DLC that Miquella kind of put Mohg under his spell and manipulated him so he could do what he wanted. Now, what we see here, the relationship between Miquella and Mohg, isn't as simple as it looks. It is something that has been kind of baked into the story through Marika, the goddess of the Golden Order, shattering the Elden Ring. It goes back that far. During the time that this war is happening of the shattering, we see Radahn and Malenia, for example, going at it. We see all these different factions, all these different creatures going at one another, basically. But Mohg is nowhere to be found. He, I don't think, participated within the war. Now, when we go into the DLC, you find Sir Azenbach, who served as one of the pureblood knights for Mohg. And by far, actually, he's one of the more interesting DLC NPCs, I believe. He was aware of the spell that Miquella had put onto Mohg. And I thought that, oh gosh, oh god. At that point, I was like, oh, so he was being manipulated this entire time. Miquella has the unique power to charm any living being. So that's, it comes with perpetual childhood. Now, this is very important to keep in mind with Miquella's lore, with even Radahn's lore, as well as Mohg's. It's really sad, and this is where he becomes one of the more disturbing characters psychologically because of how sad his entire story is and how his body basically was used as a husk to fill a need from Miquella. To become a god, Miquella also needed a consort. That consort was Radahn, and that was the role that was filled. That's what he needed him for. And it was like, okay, this Radahn is strong, he's caring, he's mindful, he's empathetic. He had all the qualities that he wanted. The ritual, however, would involve rebirthing promised consort Radahn into a body with enough strength. And this is where poor Mohg came in, and he had no idea. So it's Radahn's soul in Mohg's body. This next one's a doozy, kids. So the next most psychologically disturbing character in Elden Ring is Radagon. I don't even think I have to explain this one, but I will. So essentially, Radagon and Marika are a single twin god split into 2. Identical twins, Marika and Radagon. Marika stood against everything that the Golden Order stood for, and Radagon was like, yes, let me serve the 2 fingers. Let me serve the Golden Order. This is going to be all over the place, but we have Marika, who was married to Godfrey, and then we have Radagon, who was married to Renala, Queen of the Full Moon, who they both had Ranni the Witch. Stay with me? Please, just stay with me. Then Radagon goes to be with Marika because they are serving the same vessel. Essentially, they're serving the same Golden Order, the Fingers, Greater Will. So then you have Radagon and Marika get together, and that's when they have Miquella and Malenia. It's confusing. Still, after all this time playing it, it's still confusing. And then there's somewhere mixed into all of that is the Elden Beast that comes from both of them, because the Elden Beast is a primordial form of the Elden Ring, for which actually Marika was the vessel of. So she was the human vessel for the Elden Ring. There's a lot there, okay, which is why it's very psychologically disturbing, because you have this person who was kidnapped, essentially. Like Marika, we learned throughout the DLC that she was kidnapped from the shaman village. Oh, and also I forgot Mesmer and Melina, the one who is with us the entire journey in Elden Ring, who's there. Yeah, so those are also children of Marika as well, the Forgotten Son and the Forgotten Demigod daughter. So that's another piece of cruel lore that we don't want to forget. Now keep in mind, Radagon and Marika are two sides of the same coin, not perfect in any way, shape, or form. She sought to create the perfect world where no one would ever die, experience pain, or anything like that. It comes down to of why it's kind of so disturbing is that both Radagon and Marika could not escape the cruel twist of fate. They could not escape the world, and it's really sad because they're trying to create a world of where no one dies and no one's harmed. There's the Age of Stars, and there's the Destined Death, not Destined Death. There's an ending that you can get besides the Age of Stars of where everyone ages naturally and then dies. You know, it's just the circle of life type thing of where it sets everything back into order. And it's so fascinating to me because it's quite disturbing that actually both Marika and Radagon, they are fighting for the same thing, but they think they're on different sides. So if we look at Radagon fighting for the age of, the Golden Order, the will of the fingers, all of that kind of stuff. It's essentially the same thing. Like Marika wants to have immortality. She wanted to have, this ascension to godhood to prove that she could actually come back to her village and be like, look what I've created. But no one was there. It was kind of like she was on this path to vengeance to a degree. Number 3 on the list, Maliketh. I love Maliketh. Maliketh is disturbing. He's an interesting character. There's Destined Death that's brought into all of this. Let's get into why I think he's a psychologically disturbing character. So some of you might not have known this. I didn't know this before doing this video, that Maliketh is the half-brother of Queen Marika. That explains so much. Now this goes all the way back to the Rune of Death, and when the Rune of Death was plucked and confined, the Golden Order was created. Maliketh's blade is imbued with death. I mean, I would kind of figure that any blade is imbued with death if you hit the subject hard enough. It's also really important to note that a fragment of the Rune of Death was stolen from Maliketh by Ranni the Witch. Now, Maliketh, under the name Gurranq, resolved to track down and devour Deathroot, eventually gaining an insatiable hunger for it. This is where kind of the psychologically disturbing aspect comes into play. It's almost kind of like an addiction that he has to the Deathroot, and the Tarnished can actually take over what Dee's job is, because that character Dee that we find, who actually gets killed by Fia, we can take over kind of what he does and give him more Deathroot. And that's actually a really sad thing, because we see this character having kind of this insatiable hunger basically for death. And it's when you are really getting into the thick of the boss fight with Maliketh, and you at first have to fight Gurranq, you're basically stealing death away from the character. Now, this is the kicker. This is where things get, a little spicy, a little wonderful. The Rune of Death is unbound when Mikleth dies. Now, this is where my interpretation of the whole thing comes in, right? So with the Rune of Death being unbound, that means that the natural order and progression of life can take place. With his death, you are allowed access now into the Erd Tree, because you retrieved death. You took death back and you sprouted out all across the land. This actually goes into a very unique part of the story of where you not only have this character who houses death, who's like basically death in a character, to him dying, crying out to forgiveness to Marika, and you now have encapsulated what death is. And it kind of leaks all over the place. It's so strange to me, but it's also really fascinating and cool, because the way that the story is done, it's like, oh, we're just going to be Elden Lord. No, in a sense, and this is my theory on the entire game, we are bringing actual humanity back into the life of the lands between. It's not just about immortality. It's about being human, having things live and then die of a natural progression, which is what Marika did not want. So it's psychologically disturbing in the fact of where Maliketh was the one who housed death for Marika and was never allowed to kind of spread what natural progression of life is. He was always keeping it in, which kind of explains the insatiable hunger he always had for death, the Deathroot. I don't know. It's so fascinating to me. It's a theory work in progress, but that's one of my reasonings as to why one of the most disturbing characters of the game. So next up on the list, coming in at number 2, is Midra, Lord of the Frenzied Flame. Hands down, one of the best bosses I've ever encountered in a game, purely because of the story that this boss tells. A little bit of a fun fact for you, Connor Byron, who was the voice of Midra, also voiced Father Gascoigne in Bloodborne. The more you know. So the Lord of the Frenzied Flame. This is the power to be able to burn and wash away the world and its mistakes of the greater will. Now, the Frenzied Flame is actually a fascinating piece of lore because when you get the ending of the Frenzied Flame, you are essentially burning away the world, all of its mistakes, all of the things that the greater will has done. Just you're upending the whole of it. His cutscenes that took place, because when you go into the boss battle, you are just attacking him and it seems kind of easy at first. And I thought, wait a second, is this the boss that we're fighting? And then it goes into this cutscene and it's not intentionally disturbing, but I thought it was so incredibly psychologically disturbing. You have him pulling these brambles out of his body, and it's kind of like the madness is finally taking hold because there has just been too much pain that he has been going through. Now, keep in mind, all prospects who want to become Lord of the Frenzied Flame ultimately end up losing themselves to madness, and they are unfit to become Lord. They are unfit to take on that role because of losing themselves within that anger, within that hatred. Which essentially, I mean, it is the purpose of the Frenzied Flame, or the Lord of the Frenzied Flame, is to eradicate everything that was created by the greater will. He ended up then abusing himself further with this mental torment that was going, so it would just be a continuous cycle of hatred, self-loathing, just hatred towards the world, the greater will, the fingers, all of it. And coming in at number 1 for one of the most psychologically disturbing characters I think I've ever seen in a video game, which it's for the DLC. I'm going to be mentioning it. You guys want to guess? You guys want? You want to guess? Curse you, Bale! That's right. Bale is coming in at number 1 because I don't think I've ever seen a more disturbing creature in a DLC, or an entire game for that matter. It's probably one of the most kind of shocking dragons I've seen, because you see the cruelty in the character, and I don't know how these artists did it. Props to them, but they brought out the cruelty within the character that is in the story, and I think that is chef's kiss. Now, I already did a lore video for Bale, so if you guys want to check that out, that will be over here, somewhere over here, right over in my head area. One of, if not the most hated dragon in the DLC. Now, Bale was definitely hated. He went head to head with Placidia Sax. He went in and he has 2 of the... I still find this hilarious for some reason. I don't know. That shows my humor, right? He has 2 of Placidia Sax's head chopping down on his neck, and Placidia Sax's 2 sets of their wings were just obliterated completely. I mean, it's really fascinating to me because even after that, after losing so much skin in the game, no pun intended, they're that strong still, which I find fascinating. And you see the character, Egon, who is so incredibly devastated, heartbroken. Like, you did this, you caused so much pain and torment. And I think that's where the disturbing part comes in, because you have a character like the Tarnished or like Egon coming into the boss battle with you to fight, and you see this kind of frenzied flame leveled hatred towards Bale and what he did. It's kind of like Bale is almost a metaphor for a dictator, or someone who is starving their people, or someone who is just a really poor leader. And that's basically, a lot of dictator type stuff, right? So Bale was the most hated dragon amongst all of the dragons. He was the one who people were just like, no, we want to kill this guy. So it was so fascinating to see a lot of the lore and to see how Bale is kind of like the one that they hated the most, and how a lot of the dragons, even the dragon priestess, right, was saying, they were like kind of preaching to Placidia Sax. Placidia Sax is their god, not Bale. We could flip this on its head entirely, right? With the original theory that I had before in my previous video. We think of this kind of this beast, this monster, this being that is powerful, that's hungry, that's greedy. We think of this very powerful creature, and Placidia Sax was being worshipped, not Bale. You have jealousy, you have the hunger for power, and then you have people just worshiping Placidia Sax, and that's where you see his anger get into place, his kind of lust for power, and him being in that crater-sized pit of an area, kind of like the frenzied flame, just wallowing in self-hatred and loathing for himself. You guys, that was it for my video on the top 5 most disturbing characters in Elden Ring. If you guys like my face and what I do, please be sure to subscribe and hit that bell down below. May you find your worth in the waking world, your hunter. Stay casually nerdy, and I will see you all in the next video. Umbasa.